At my son's wedding, which I paid for in full, his arrogant new wife pointed straight at me and said to her friends, "This is the fat old pig we have to put up with." Everyone laughed, until her father recognized me and turned pale. But just a few more days, they will all pay the price for this humiliation. Thank you for being here. Please like, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Quick note, this story blends creative storytelling with real-life wisdom. Names and details may be crafted for narrative purposes, but the truth behind the message is what truly matters. I still remember the exact texture of the silence that followed her words. Not the kind of silence you hear when someone makes a beautiful toast at a wedding. This was different. This was the silence of 100 people, holding their breath, waiting to see if what they just heard was real. I was standing near the dessert table when it happened. The Boston Public Library's Bates Hall had never looked more beautiful. Crystal chandeliers, silk tablecloths, centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. I'd been watching Daniel dance with his new wife, feeling that strange mix of pride and distance that had followed me all evening. That's when I heard Samantha's voice. She was about 15 feet away with a group of friends, all holding champagne flutes like they were born with crystal in their hands. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice cut through the music and laughter. "I'm telling you, she's exhausting," Samantha said. "Bradley's mother. She's been hovering since the engagement, calling every week, offering opinions nobody asked for." One of her friends laughed. "Oh God, the clingy mother-in-law type." "Exactly." Samantha continued, her voice getting louder. "And she's so, I don't know how to say this nicely, middle class about everything. Like she doesn't understand how things work in families like ours." My hands went cold. The wedding she thought was fancy. The wedding I'd paid $425,000 for. Every flower in her hand, every bite of food on those elegant plates, all paid for by the woman she was mocking. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came next when Samantha gestured in my direction with her champagne flute, that perfectly manicured hand, pointing at me like I was something on display. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to her circle, her voice carrying across the marble floors, "I'd like you to meet the old fat pig we have to put up with." The laughter that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was genuine, delighted, like she'd said something clever instead of cruel. Heads turned following her gesture, seeing me standing there with my dessert plate and my burgundy dress. I looked for Daniel, found him near the head table, still in his tuxedo. He'd heard. I could tell by the way his shoulders tensed, by the way he suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. My son, the boy I'd raised alone, whose education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd just paid for, heard his new wife call me a pig, and he looked at the floor. Near the bar, I caught a glimpse of Claire Samantha's younger sister, 26, with her sister's blonde hair, but none of her cruelty. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in her face that looked like shame. That's when I felt it. Not my heart breaking, that would come later. This was something harder. The wall I'd put up between who I really was and who I'd been pretending to be for my son's sake. The wall between Helen Coleman, successful CEO, and Helen Coleman, grateful mother of the groom, at table 14. And in that moment, watching them laugh, watching my son stare at his shoes, I realized something that would change everything. They had no idea who I really was, but they were about to find out. I watched George Worthington's face change. It started with his eyes' confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked remarkably like fear. He just joined the little circle of laughter, champagne glass in hand, that easy smile wealthy men wear when they're comfortable in their world. He'd probably heard the tail end of his daughter's joke, seen the pointing, joined in the amusement, without really paying attention to who was on the receiving end. But then he looked, really looked, at me standing there by the dessert table in my carefully chosen burgundy dress. At the woman his daughter had just called a pig in front of 200 guests, and I watched the color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the lingering laughter. The smile was gone now. Aren't you Helen Ashford?" The group went silent. That kind of silence that feels different from the one before, heavier, confused waiting. George's hand started to shake slightly, champagne rippling in his glass. Helen Coleman. He corrected himself, his voice barely above a whisper. Ashford was your maiden name. You went back to it for the business. Samantha turned to her father, her perfect smile finally cracking. Dad, what are you talking about? That's Daniel's mother. Her name is Coleman. But George wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was staring at me with the kind of expression I'd seen before on people who just realized they'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The kind of expression that comes when you understand you've been playing poker with someone who's been holding all the cards while you thought you were winning. He swallowed hard and I could see his throat working. You're my new CEO. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Around us, the reception continued music, playing people, dancing servers, carrying trays. But in our little corner, everything had stopped. Linda Worthington materialized at her husband's elbow, her smile frozen in place like a mask that no longer fit. George, what's happening? Samantha was looking between us now, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. I could see her mind working, trying to connect the dots, trying to understand why her father looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Mrs. Coleman. George started, then stopped. Mrs. Ashford. I had no idea. Samantha never mentioned, it's Coleman. I said calmly, my voice steady in a way I didn't quite feel. Helen Coleman. Though in professional settings, I use Ashford. It avoids confusion. I let that sink in for a moment, watching understanding dawn on Samantha's face, watching her realize that the middle-class woman she'd just humiliated, the clingy mother-in-law she'd just called a pig, owned 51% of her father's company. That come Monday morning, her father would be sitting across a boardroom table from me, and the balance of power would be very, very different from what it appeared tonight. It's nice to officially meet you, George. I continued setting down my dessert plate with careful precision. I look forward to our meeting Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I believe. We have quite a lot to discuss. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, found my small evening bag where I'd left it on table 14, that table in the back corner near the kitchen doors, where they'd thought I belonged. I picked it up, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the exit. As I passed, I saw Claire standing near the bar, separated now from her family's group. Our eyes met. She gave me the smallest nod, and I saw something in her face that looked like respect, like she'd been waiting her whole life to see someone stand up to them. I walked out of the Boston Public Library into the September night. The air was cool, almost cold, and I could hear the sounds of the city beyond traffic voices, life continuing as it always did. Behind me, in that beautiful hall with its crystal and silk and $425,000 worth of elegance, I'd left my son and his new wife and her family to figure out what had just happened. I walked away from my son's wedding. The wedding I'd paid $425,000 for. The wedding where his new wife had called me a pig. And I didn't look back. If this story is touching something in you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. I didn't cry on the drive home that night. I saved my tears for later when I was alone with my memories and my whiskey. But to understand why that Saturday night broke something in me that had been cracking for years, you need to understand where I came from. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the wedding, but to the night that changed everything. September 23rd, 2005. The night my husband died and I became someone I never planned to be. I was 42 years old, sitting in a hospital chair that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Henry had been sick for 6 months, cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't care how many plans you had. I'm sorry, Mrs. Coleman, the doctor said. He was young, probably fresh out of residency, and I remember thinking how unfair it was that he had to be the one to say those words. Henry had been unconscious for hours, but I'd stayed, held his hand. Before the morphine took him under for the last time, he'd squeezed my hand. His voice was barely a whisper. Take care of the business, Helen, he'd said. Take care of Daniel, and if George ever needs help, remember he's a good man who made mistakes. I hadn't understood what he meant about George. We knew the Worthingtons' Boston's not that big in certain business circles, but we weren't close. Why was Henry thinking about George Worthington in his final moments? The words drifted away with him, and I filed them as nothing more than the ramblings of a dying man. The drive home was the longest of my life. Daniel was sleeping when I got there, 12 years old, safe in his bed. I stood outside his door, my hand on the knob, gathering courage to wake him and shatter his world. Instead, I went to Henry's office first. The desk was still covered with his notebooks, his coffee-stained plans for expansion. There was a half-finished cup of coffee on a stack of papers, and I picked it up cold now and held it like something precious. Henry's brother had pulled me aside at the hospital. "You should sell the company, Helen. You're a widow with a young son. You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." I'd nodded, thanked him, said I'd think about it. But sitting there in Henry's chair, surrounded by his dreams and his plans, I made a different decision. I wouldn't sell, I would learn, I would work. I would build what we'd started together, and I would do it for Daniel so he'd have something from his father, beyond memories. "Mom." Daniel's voice from the doorway, sleepy and confused. He was wearing his Red Sox pajamas, the ones Henry had bought him at Fenway Park that summer. "Come here, baby," I said, and I opened my arms and I held my son while I told him his father was gone. And I put on the brave face that I would wear for the next 19 years, the face that said everything was going to be okay, that I had everything under control, that he didn't need to worry because I would take care of it all. I didn't know then that keeping the business would be the easy part. Raising Daniel to be a man his father would be proud of, that was where I would fail. They say you can't pour from an empty cup, but nobody tells you what to do when you're the cup, the water, and the person who needs the drink all at once. By Daniel's 13th birthday, I'd stabilized the business. That first year after Henry died was hell learning property management while grieving, making decisions I wasn't sure about, proving to bankers and investors that a widow could run a company her husband had built. But I did it. Not just survived, thrived. Over the next 19 years, I transformed what Henry had started. Ashford Hospitality Group grew from managing a handful of properties into owning and operating boutique hotels across New England. We specialized in historic buildings, the kind with stories in their bones, old textile mills converted into luxury stays, Victorian mansions reimagined as intimate retreats, the kind of places where every detail mattered. I worked 16-hour days and never missed a single one of Daniel's school events. Parent-teacher conferences, basketball games, debate tournaments. I was there even when I was exhausted beyond measure. Even when I'd been up at 5 dealing with a plumbing emergency at our Portland property, I'd still show up at 7 for his awards ceremony, smile fixed in place. The business community in Boston came to respect me, not as Henry Coleman's widow, but as Helen Ashford, the woman who'd built something real. I served on boards, advised startups, mentored other women in hospitality. My company became the kind that business schools studied. But Daniel never asked what I did, never showed interest in the empire I was building for him, and I never pushed. I told myself I wanted him to be independent, to make his own way, to not feel pressured by his mother's success. That was my first lie to myself. The truth was simpler and more painful. I was buying his love with the only currency I knew. Money, freedom, the absence of consequences. MBA at a prestigious business school, I paid every penny without question. Apartment in Back Bay with hardwood floors and a view of the Charles recovered the deposit and the rent. Car payments, insurance, dinners, out vacations with friends. I funded it all, gladly, proudly. Like each check I wrote was proof I was being both parents, filling the hole Henry had left. I thought I was giving him security. I was giving him entitlement. I thought I was teaching him independence. I was teaching him that money appeared whenever he needed it, that mom would always say yes, that effort was optional when you had someone who loved you enough to carry you. I never said no, not once in 19 years. During those years, I also quietly, carefully, strategically built a portfolio beyond Ashford Hospitality. I acquired minority shares in several Boston companies, nothing flashy, just smart investments that grew steadily, building quiet power while everyone saw me as just a successful hotelier. Every night I'd sit in what had been Henry's office and talk to his photograph on my desk, the one where he's 38, healthy, smiling that crooked smile he had whenever I took his picture. "We're doing okay, aren't we?" I'd ask him. Daniel's gonna be fine. He's got his MBA now. He's got that consulting job. He's independent. Henry's photo never answered, but I'd convinced myself the answer was yes. By 29, Daniel had graduated, found work at a consulting firm, moved into his own place. From the outside, he looked like everything I'd worked so hard to give him: educated, employed, independent. I thought I'd succeeded. And then he met Samantha Worthington, the girl who would show me exactly what I'd created. "Mom," Daniel said on a Tuesday evening in late March, his voice having that quality it used to have when he was a teenager with his first crush. "I met someone special." I remember setting down my tea, smiling at the phone. This was what I'd been waiting for: Daniel, finding someone, starting his own family, having the kind of happiness Henry and I had shared. "Tell me everything," I said, and he did. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel talked about Samantha like she was made of light. She was beautiful. She was smart. She was ambitious. She came from an old Boston family, the Worthingtons, he said, like I should recognize the name immediately. I did recognize it, actually. When you've spent 2 decades in Boston business circles, you know the players. Worthington Holdings was a name I'd heard at chamber meetings, seen in commercial real estate journals. The name rang a bell, though I couldn't quite place why it felt familiar beyond the usual business connections. "Her family owns Worthington Holdings." Daniel continued, that pride creeping into his voice. "They've been in Boston forever. Her sister's wedding was at the Four Seasons." One sentence, brief and shining, like he was testing how impressed I'd be. "That sounds lovely," I said, meaning it. "When do I get to meet her?" There was a pause. Just a second, but I heard it. That tiny hesitation that every parent learns to recognize the sound of a child who's about to ask for something or hide something or navigate something complicated. "Soon, Mom. I just want to make sure we're serious first." I should have pushed, should have asked why he needed to wait, why meeting his mother required certainty first, but I didn't. I told myself I was respecting his independence, giving him space to build his own relationship without his mother hovering. That was another lie I told myself. The months that followed felt strange. Daniel called less often. When we did talk, he mentioned Samantha constantly, but never suggested we meet. I'd see charges on the credit card I'd given him for emergencies, expensive restaurants, weekend trips, designer stores. I assumed his consulting job was going well, that he was finally earning the kind of money that let him enjoy life. I didn't know he'd already started drowning. Samantha has a younger sister. Daniel mentioned one evening months into their relationship. "Claire, she's different from the rest of them, quieter. I think you'd like her." It was a strange thing to say, and I remembered thinking different, why would he mention that I'd like her specifically? But I filed it away with all the other small oddities I was choosing not to examine. Around that same time, I was going through Henry's old estate papers, organizing files I'd been meaning to sort for years. In a box labeled Historical 2004, I found the name Worthington on several documents. I made a mental note to look at them more carefully later, but I was busy with a property acquisition in Newport, and the note got buried under more urgent matters. Late in 2023, Daniel called with news. "We're engaged," he said, and I could hear both pride and something else in his voice, something tight, almost strained. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, tears springing to my eyes. "I'm so happy for you. When can I meet her?" "Soon," he said again. That word, always soon, never now. The wedding date was set for September 15th, 2024. I had less than a year to meet the woman who would become my daughter-in-law. And 6 months before the wedding, Daniel called with a request. The first request that should have made me say no, but I'd spent 19 years never saying no to my son. Why would I start now? The wedding venues Samantha is looking at start around $285,000. Daniel said over the phone, like ripping off a bandage, just for the basics. I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports. The pen in my hand stopped mid-sentence, hovering over the page. $285,000, I repeated slowly, for a wedding. I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, you don't understand. Samantha's family has certain expectations. Her sister's wedding cost nearly $500,000. I tried to keep my voice neutral. What about Samantha's family? Traditionally, the bride's family handles most wedding expenses. Another pause. I was getting used to those pauses. George said he'd contribute what he can, Daniel said carefully, but their capital is tied up temporarily. Cash flow issues. I knew that truly wealthy families didn't have liquidity problems when it came to their daughter's wedding, but I didn't say that. Darling, if they're going through financial difficulties, maybe a smaller wedding. Mom, no. His voice was sharp. It's just timing. I can't ask them. I can't show up empty-handed. I need to contribute equally. I need to show them I can take care of their daughter. There was that desperation again, that need to prove something I didn't fully understand. How much total? I asked. With everything catering, flowers, photography, the dress, the band, around $400,000, maybe a bit more. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Daniel, that's... I know. But Mom, I love her. This is important to her family. I can't lose her because I couldn't give her the wedding she deserves. Couldn't give her. Like love was measured in dollars and venue prestige. I should have said no. Should have explained that a marriage built on financial pressure was already cracking. Should have asked why a woman who truly loved him would need him to prove it this way. But I looked at Henry's photograph on my desk, that smile I'd loved for so many years, and I thought about what he would have done. Henry, who never could say no to Daniel. Let me think about it, I said. That night, I sat alone with whiskey and Henry's photo and a calculator. $400,000 was significant, but I could manage it. It would delay my retirement, eat into my emergency fund, but I could do it. What would you do? I asked the photograph. Henry would have said yes, would have written the check with a smile, so I called Daniel the next morning. I'll take care of it. His relief was audible. Thank you, Mom. You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you. Over the next months, as Samantha's plans expanded, upgraded flowers, better band, more elaborate favors, the number climbed. $285 became $300, became $350, became $425,000. Every time Daniel called with another addition, I said yes. I didn't know that every dollar I spent was buying me a seat at table 14. I didn't know that my generosity would be repaid with the word pig. No. I didn't know that George Worthington's temporary cash flow issues were anything but temporary. September 15th, 2024. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, 2 hours before my alarm, my heart already racing with the kind of nervous energy that comes before life-changing days. I just didn't know yet how much my life was about to change. The house in Beacon Hill was quiet, that special kind of silence that comes just before dawn, when even the city seems to be holding its breath. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Daniel as a little boy, how he used to climb into bed with Henry and me on Saturday mornings, his small body warm and trusting between us. Today, my baby was getting married. I spent an hour getting ready, moving through the rituals slowly, carefully. The burgundy dress I'd chosen hung on the back of my closet door. 3 weeks I'd spent finding it, trying on dozens, until I found one that felt right. Dignified without being overdressed. Elegant without trying too hard. The dress of a mother who wanted to belong without demanding attention. The drive to Trinity Church took 20 minutes. The September morning was crisp and bright. The kind of autumn day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Trees along Commonwealth Avenue were just starting to turn hints of gold among the green. I rolled down the window and let the cool air wash over my face. When I arrived at the church, the Worthingtons were already there. I could hear them before I saw them, loud, confident, filling the space with their presence. George and Linda holding court on the steps, their voices carrying across Copley Square. Samantha's relatives clustering around them, everyone dressed in shades of cream and champagne, like they'd coordinated without needing to discuss it. I felt like an outsider immediately. My burgundy dress suddenly seemed too dark, too plain, too trying not to try. But I held my head high and walked into the church. And there was one thing they couldn't take from me, one place where I belonged, whether they liked it or not, the front row. Mother of the groom. That seat was mine. I sat down and waited, hands folded in my lap, while the church filled around me. When the music started, when Daniel appeared at the altar with his best man, my breath caught. He looked so much like his father. Same height, same broad shoulders, same way of standing with his weight slightly on his left foot. He was wearing Henry's cufflinks I'd given them to him that morning at his apartment. "Dad would be so proud of you," I'd whispered, straightening his bow tie. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd said. But his eyes had drifted away from mine, unable to quite hold my gaze. I'd told myself it was just nerves. Now, watching him at the altar, I felt such hope, such certainty that this was right, that all the sacrifice had been worth it, that my son was beginning the kind of life Henry and I had dreamed for him. The processional began. Samantha appeared at the back of the church in her $15,000 dress, and she was beautiful, genuinely breathtakingly beautiful. I understood why Daniel loved her, why he'd wanted so badly to give her this day. They exchanged vows, they kissed. They walked back down the aisle as husband and wife and I cried happy tears into the handkerchief I'd brought for exactly this purpose. I thought this was a beginning. I had no idea it was an ending. But you already know that part. What you don't know is where I went when the room full of 200 guests pretended they hadn't just witnessed my public humiliation. Table 14. Back corner. Near the kitchen doors. I found my seat the way you'd find your way home in the dark, by the quiet certainty that comes from knowing exactly where you don't belong. The seating chart had been very clear. Tables 1 through 3 Worthingtons, tables 4 through 6 Daniel's college friends, table 7 my side of the family, and table 14 me. The centerpiece in front of me probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. White roses and peonies arranged with the kind of precision that only $425,000 can buy. I'd written that check 6 months ago, and George Worthington had accepted it like tribute owed to royalty. From my seat, I watched my son dance with his new wife under chandeliers that had witnessed a century of Boston's finest moments. A marble column blocked my direct view of the head table, but I could catch glimpses. Daniel's profile when he turned to kiss Samantha, her laugh carrying across the room like crystal breaking. The Worthingtons toasted and congratulated themselves on a wedding well done. I noticed Claire Worthington before she noticed me. She was standing near her family's tables, champagne glass in hand, but her eyes kept drifting my direction. 3 times I caught her looking. Each time her expression held something I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not amusement. Something closer to conflict. The 4th time our eyes met, she set down her glass and started walking toward me. She moved across that ballroom like someone approaching a car accident, slowly and inevitably, with the kind of dread that comes from knowing you can't look away. When she reached table 14, she didn't sit. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her seafoam bridesmaid's dress. "Mrs. Coleman," she said quietly. Her voice was different from her sister's, softer, less certain. "Claire." I acknowledged. She glanced back at her family's tables, then leaned down slightly. "I need to talk to you. Not here. Somewhere private." I studied her face. 24 years old, with Samantha's blonde hair, but none of her cruelty. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Why?" I asked, simply. She swallowed hard. "Because there are things you don't know. Things my family has been hiding. Things that..." She glanced back again. "Things that explain tonight. What happened. Why they're so afraid of you." The word afraid hung between us. "I'm listening," I said. "Not here." Claire repeated, urgency creeping into her voice. "Please, tomorrow. Anywhere you want. But I need to tell you the truth before Monday." Before Monday. Before my 9 o'clock meeting with her father. I pulled out my phone, typed an address, and showed her the screen. My Beacon Hill home. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, come alone." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Thank you. I know you have no reason to trust me, but..." "I don't trust you," I said evenly. "But I'll listen. 2 o'clock." She started to say something else, then stopped. For a moment, she looked like she might cry again. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked back toward her family's tables. I watched her go, then stood and gathered my small evening bag. I'd heard enough speeches endured, enough champagne toasts sat at enough corners of enough rooms to last a lifetime. I walked through the marble halls of the Boston Public Library and out into the September night. The air was cool, almost cold, and I could hear the sounds of the city beyond. Behind me in that beautiful hall with its crystal and silk, I'd left my son and his new wife and her family to figure out what had just happened. Tomorrow, Claire Worthington would tell me why they were so afraid. Tonight, I just needed to go home. When I got home, I kicked off my heels' expensive shoes that had hurt all night, but looked elegant. They landed somewhere near the hall table. I didn't care where. I walked straight to Henry's office. Our office. My office. From the bottom drawer of the desk, I pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Henry's favorite brand makers marked the one with the red wax seal. I only drank it on the hardest days. The day he died, the day Daniel graduated and didn't thank me in his speech, the day I signed the final paperwork making me sole owner of what we'd built together. Tonight, qualified. I poured 2 fingers into a rocks glass and sat in Henry's leather chair, worn soft from decades of use. His photograph sat on the desk where it had been for 19 years, him at 38, healthy, alive, smiling. That smile he had whenever I took his picture. I messed up, I told him. I raised him wrong somehow. My phone started buzzing. I pulled it out, saw Linda's name, and declined the call. It buzzed again. George, declined. Samantha, declined. I turned it face down and took another sip of whiskey. The office was quiet except for the rain and my own breathing. I looked around at the filing cabinets, the bookshelves, the boxes of old paperwork I'd been meaning to sort through for years. And suddenly, I needed a distraction. Needed something to do with my hands, something to focus on besides the word pig echoing in my head. I pulled out the box labeled Historical 2004. I'd found it months ago while looking for something else had meant to go through it, but other things had taken priority. Inside were file folders, each one neatly labeled in Henry's handwriting. Property acquisitions, partnership agreements, legal documents, and one marked simply Worthington. My hands went still. I pulled out the folder and opened it. Inside were loan documents, correspondence, business plans. I started reading, and with each page something cold and hard began growing in my chest. 2004. George Worthington's company was failing. The document spelled it out, clearly missed payments, creditors circling bankruptcy imminent. And Henry, my generous, kind-hearted Henry, had stepped in with a loan, $500,000 to save Worthington Holdings. The loan agreement was straightforward. Repayment over 5 years, reasonable interest rate, everything proper and legal. There were letters from George, dated 2004 and 2005. Grateful letters. Promising letters. I'll never forget this, Henry. You saved my family. I swear I'll repay every penny. But Henry had died in 2005 before any repayment came. And then I found the letter from 2006, from George's lawyer, declaring the debt disputed due to lack of written collateral and therefore uncollectible from the estate. I read it 3 times, making sure I understood what I was seeing. George Worthington had stolen from a widow and a 12-year-old child. He'd taken my husband's kindness, my husband's trust, my husband's $500,000, and he declared it didn't exist. For 19 years, he'd been living in Lewisburg Square on money he'd stolen from my family. For 19 years, he'd been building his life on my husband's generosity while pretending the debt didn't exist. And 2 weeks ago, he'd watched me write a check for $425,000 for a wedding he should have funded himself. A wedding his family should have paid for if they'd repaid what they owed. My hands were shaking. The whiskey glass rattled against the desk when I set it down. George Worthington had stolen from my family. He'd betrayed my husband's final act of kindness. I sat there in Henry's chair, surrounded by evidence of a 20-year theft, and felt something shift inside me. Not grief anymore, not shock, rage, cold, calculated, absolute rage. And on Monday morning, George Worthington was going to learn what it costs to cross a widow who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I picked up my phone and started making a list. People to call, documents to gather, lawyers to consult. The night was just beginning, and so was my plan. My phone started ringing at 7 o'clock Sunday morning. I was already awake, sitting in Henry's chair, surrounded by 20-year-old documents that proved my husband had saved the man whose daughter had just called me a pig. The voicemails piled up faster than I could delete them. Linda's voice first tight with forced pleasantness. "Mrs. Coleman, we need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure if we just sit down together we can clear this up. Please call me back." A terrible misunderstanding. As if I'd misheard my new daughter-in-law calling me a pig in front of 200 guests. George called next, his voice shaking. "Mrs. Ashford, Mrs. Coleman, Helen, we need to discuss Monday's meeting. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that works for everyone. I think there's been some confusion about the nature of our business relationship. Please let's talk before things get complicated." An arrangement. Confusion. The language of a man trying to negotiate his way out of consequences. Samantha's message came third, sounding younger than her 28 years. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm so sorry about what happened at the reception. I had too much champagne and I wasn't thinking clearly. It was supposed to be funny. I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about someone else and people thought I was pointing at you. Please, can we talk? Daniel is so upset." I almost laughed. The lie was so transparent it was insulting. As if 200 people had collectively hallucinated her gesture, her laugh, her voice carrying across marble floors. I deleted each message without finishing it. Poured myself coffee. Sat back down with Henry's documents. The phone rang again. Derek called George's eldest son, the one who'd been standing in that circle of laughter. "Mrs. Coleman, this is Derek Worthington. I wanted to reach out personally to apologize for any discomfort at the wedding. Family events can get emotional. I hope we can move forward professionally." Professional. As if Saturday night had been a minor social faux pas instead of deliberate public humiliation. Delete. Trevor called next, stammering through an apology that sounded lawyer-written and poorly memorized. Delete. At 10 o'clock, Daniel called. This time, I answered. "Mom." His voice was strained. "Samantha told me something happened at the reception. You're George's boss now. How is that possible?" I kept my voice calm. "It's been in the works for several years. I acquired controlling interest in Worthington Holdings 6 months ago. I didn't mention it because it didn't seem relevant to your relationship with Samantha." "Not relevant?" His voice rose. "Mom, Samantha's family is freaking out. They're saying you own their company. They're saying you've been hiding this. George has been calling all morning. Linda's crying. It does change things." I agreed, "but not in the way they think." "What does that mean?" I looked at the documents spread across Henry's desk. The loan agreement, the dispute letter, 20 years of theft. "It means your new father-in-law owes our family a significant debt, and on Monday morning we're going to discuss how he plans to repay it." Silence on his end. I could almost hear him trying to process, trying to navigate between his new wife's family and his mother. "Daniel, your wife called me a fat pig in front of 200 people. Her family should feel grateful I'm professional enough to separate business from personal relationships. She said it was a joke you misunderstood. It wasn't a joke. It was cruelty. There's a difference." My voice was harder now. "And if you can't see that difference, then I failed you worse than I thought." Silence again. My son, who'd always had an excuse ready, didn't know what to say. "I have to go," I said finally. "We'll talk later." I hung up before he could respond. The phone kept ringing throughout the day. More Worthingtons, business associates who'd heard rumors, even my own relatives wondering what had happened, why I'd left early. I ignored them all. Around 2 o'clock after the 15th voicemail, I turned my phone to silent and set it face down on the desk. The afternoon passed slowly. I sat with Henry's documents, reading them over and over, making notes, building my case. Just before 3, my phone screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Coleman, this is Claire Worthington, Samantha's sister. May I please speak with you? I promise I'm not here to make excuses for my family. There are truths you deserve to know. Things they've been hiding for a very long time." I stared at the message. Claire. The younger sister Daniel had mentioned once the one who was different from the rest of them. The girl whose face had looked apologetic at the reception, who'd caught my eye with something like shame. I typed back, "My house, Beacon Hill, 2 o'clock tomorrow." Her response came immediately, "Thank you, I'll be there. And Mrs. Coleman, I'm sorry for all of it." I set the phone down and looked at Henry's photograph on my desk. The September afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows. "Tomorrow," I told him, "tomorrow I find out what else they've been hiding. Because when someone's entire family starts panicking about what you might discover, it usually means there's far more to discover than you thought." The Worthingtons were terrified of what I knew, which meant there was something else I didn't know yet, and Claire was about to tell me what it was. I poured another finger of whiskey and watched the sun set over Boston. Somewhere in this city, George Worthington was probably consulting lawyers trying to figure out how to control the situation. But the situation was already beyond his control. It had been beyond his control the moment his daughter pointed at me and said the word pig. He just didn't know it yet. Claire Worthington ordered chamomile tea with trembling hands and then proceeded to dismantle her family's carefully constructed facade with the precision of someone who'd been watching it crumble for years. She wrapped both hands around the cup like she needed its warmth. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "My father is going bankrupt," she said. "Has been for 3 years." I set down my coffee carefully. "Go on." 2019. Dad expanded too aggressively. 3 new commercial properties in Cambridge leveraged everything to do it. Then 2020 happened. The pandemic. I remembered those months' businesses closing, property values plummeting. "Dad's properties went empty," Claire continued. "Office buildings nobody wanted because everyone was working from home. Retail spaces with no customers. But the mortgages didn't stop. Nothing stopped except the money coming in." By 2022, he was desperate. He took out loans from private lenders, the kind who don't ask questions but charge interest rates that would make your head spin. How much does he owe? $3 million. To various creditors. She looked down at her tea. The house on Louisburg Square mortgaged to the maximum. Derek's salary, just more debt Dad takes on. Trevor. He hasn't generated a single paying client in 2 years. The picture was becoming clearer. "The wedding," I said slowly. "Your father saw it as a business opportunity, yes." Her hands tightened around her cup. "When Daniel started dating Samantha, Dad investigated. Found out about Ashford Hospitality Group, found out you were successful, wealthy, and he saw a way out. He thought if our families merged, you'd naturally want to help your son's new in-laws. Dad pushed for an expensive wedding, hoping you'd get financially involved, hoping the connection would lead to opportunities. I thought about George's excuse about temporary cash flow issues, about how he'd let me pay $425,000 for a wedding his family should have funded. It hadn't been pride. It had been a trap. Samantha knew, not the extent. She knew things were tight, but Dad's good at maintaining appearances." Claire's voice cracked. "Saturday night, it was years of fear and pretense coming out in the worst way. She was nervous drunk trying to prove she still had power over something. But that doesn't excuse it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I should have warned someone sooner. I should have warned Daniel. I should have warned you." Her eyes were wet. "I was afraid of my own family. But after Saturday, after watching what they did to you, I couldn't stay silent anymore. And now I own 51% of a company that's worth nothing." "Yes, I'm sorry. You bought a sinking ship." She paused. "But there's more. Something else you need to know before Monday." Claire finished her tea. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight was breaking through clouds. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "Something about your husband. Something my father never wanted anyone to know. My father owed your husband money," Claire said, not meeting my eyes. "A lot of money, money he never repaid." I studied her face, said nothing. She continued, voice barely steady. 20 years ago, Dad was going to lose everything. The company, our home, his reputation. Your husband saved him." I let the silence stretch for a moment, then quietly, "I know. $500,000. I found the documents Saturday night." Claire's head snapped up. Keep talking. I want to hear your version." She took a shaky breath. I was 6 or 7 years old. I woke up one night to my parents screaming at each other downstairs. I'd never heard them fight like that before, so I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. Her voice got softer, like she was back in that moment, small and scared in her pajamas. My mother was sobbing. I remember that sound. It terrified me. She kept saying, "How can we not repay Henry? He saved us. He trusted us." I could picture it. Linda Worthington, who I'd only ever seen perfectly composed, falling apart in her own kitchen. And my father, his voice was different, cold. He said, "Henry's dead, Linda. His widow has her own business. She's doing fine. She doesn't need it." Each word landed like a small stone. Mom said, "That doesn't make it right. We owe them." And Dad said, "We can't afford it. I disputed the debt legally. It's done." Claire looked up at me and there were tears on her cheeks now. I didn't understand what disputed the debt meant. I was too young. I just knew it was something bad, something that made my mother cry. So I went back to bed and tried to forget. But you didn't forget. No, I was 12 when I finally understood, when I realized what my father had done, that he'd stolen from a widow and a child. Her voice broke. I've been carrying that for 14 years, knowing, saying nothing. Why didn't you tell someone? Who would I tell? I was 12, then 14, then 16. And it was my father. You don't destroy your own family, do you? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Samantha doesn't know. Derek doesn't know. Just my parents and me. And now you. Why are you telling me this, Claire? You're betraying your family. She looked up at me and her eyes were clear, now determined. Because what they did to you Saturday night was unforgivable. Because my father's been living a lie for 20 years. Because someone needs to stop this. I saw Henry in her then, not in her face, but in her choice. The choice to do what was right instead of what was easy. To choose truth over comfort, honor over family loyalty. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. I just thought you should know everything before Monday, before you decide what to do with them, with us. She paused. And I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family is like that. Some of us still believe in paying our debts. And what will you do? Whatever truth requires, she said simply. Testify, provide documents, stand witness. Whatever brings honesty back. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the September afternoon was turning golden, that particular light that only comes in autumn. The rain was completely gone now, and the streets were drying in patches. "Thank you, Claire," I said finally, "for your courage." She nodded, gathering her purse. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Monday morning, I walked into Worthington Holdings at 8:30, early enough to make a point. Armed with 20 years of lies, $3 million in debt, and a secret ally inside the family, George Worthington didn't stand a chance. I didn't sleep Sunday night. By 8:30 Monday morning, I walked through the glass doors of Worthington Holdings in my sharpest charcoal suit, the one I wore to acquisitions. The confident patriarch from the wedding was gone. This man looked 10 years older. "Helen," he began, voice tight. "We need to talk privately." "We'll talk," I said evenly, "at 9 o'clock, in the boardroom, with the full executive team." His face drained. "That's not necessary." 9 o'clock, George. At exactly 9, I walked into the boardroom. George sat at what used to be the head of the table. Derek and Trevor flanked him. 3 department heads filled the remaining seats. Claire slipped in last, sitting near the door. She nodded once. I sat at the opposite end. Janet distributed folders. "Open them," I said. Inside Worthington Holdings, actual financial statements. $3 million in debt. Properties hemorrhaging cash. Loans at interest rates that should be illegal. I watched their faces change as they read. This company I began, my voice calm but absolute, is 60 days from bankruptcy. The Cambridge properties are underwater. The Providence Hotel hasn't made a profit in 18 months. George started to speak. I raised one hand. Derek, your marketing position has produced 0 measurable results in 18 months. Trevor, your property management involves contractors we don't need and can't afford. 3 of them are owned by your college roommate, all overcharging by 30%. Derek's face flushed. Trevor stared at the table. I turned to George. And you have been running this company into the ground while maintaining the appearance of success. I opened the second folder. Inside photocopies of the 2004 loan agreement. I slid the next document across the 2006 dispute letter. 1 year after Henry died, you disputed the debt, claimed it was a gift. You stole from a widow and a 12-year-old child, all listing Coleman family connections without permission. For 20 years, you've committed fraud in my husband's name, telling investors we were partners, using Coleman reputation to secure loans you didn't deserve. The legal director's face went pale. Here's what happens next, I said. Derek, your position is eliminated, effective immediately. Trevor, your contract converts to performance-based management under outside supervision. The nepotism ends today. You can't, George started. I own 51%. I can do exactly this. I stood. George, you have 2 choices. Resign with dignity by end of business today with standard severance, or I terminate you for cause tomorrow morning publicly and you leave with nothing. You have until 5 o'clock. I walked to the door. The room remained frozen. This company will be restructured, refinanced, and rebuilt under professional management, or it will be sold. Either way, it survives. I paused. The Coleman family finished saving Worthington Holdings for the second and final time. The boardroom door closed behind me with a soft click that felt like thunder. Janet was waiting outside with another folder. Her expression told me the day wasn't over. Mrs. Coleman, she said softly. Your son is here. He says it's an emergency. My chest tightened. Daniel. Of course it was Daniel. Daniel looked terrible. Wrinkled suit, red-rimmed eyes, disheveled hair. This wasn't the polished man who'd married 2 days ago. This was someone who hadn't slept, who'd been crying, who had nowhere left to hide. Mom, we need to talk. I gestured to the chair. He collapsed into it. Samantha said I had to tell you myself, before you found out another way. My chest tightened. I lost my consulting job 6 months ago. March 2024, right after I'd agreed to pay for the wedding. I falsified expense reports. They caught me. Fired me. His voice cracked. I was too ashamed to tell you or Samantha, so I pretended. Went to Starbucks every morning for 8 hours, kept wearing the suits you bought. His hands twisted in his lap. I started borrowing to keep up appearances. Used your information as collateral, credit cards, personal loans in your name. I thought I'd pay it back before you knew. How much? $165,000. The number hit like a fist, not the amount I'd spent more on his wedding, but the deception, the theft. 2 years of lies while I'd congratulated myself on raising an independent son. I couldn't tell you. Daniel said, tears falling. You'd done so much already. I couldn't admit I'd failed. And there it was. I'd taught him this, not the stealing that was his choice, but the belief that failure was unacceptable, that appearances mattered more than truth. That love meant never disappointing me. 19 years of making sure he never faced consequences, never experienced discomfort, never had to choose between what he wanted and what he could afford. I'd created a 31-year-old man who would commit identity theft rather than admit he'd lost his job. I'll pay off these debts, I said quietly. Not for you, for me, because you put them in my name and I won't destroy my own credit. Relief flooded his face. But you'll pay me back, $2,000 a month, every month, 7 years. Miss a payment, I take legal action. His face went pale. You'll start therapy, twice a week, non-negotiable. Someone who specializes in financial anxiety and family dynamics. Mom, I'm not finished. I stood. You'll keep your position at Worthington Holdings, but you'll earn it. Performance-based, no special treatment. You fail, you're fired. I turned to face him. And no more financial help from me. Not for rent, not for cars, not for anything. That ends today, permanently. His shoulders shook. I'm so sorry. I know. And I love you, Daniel, but I'm done enabling you. The word hung between us. Enabling. What I'd been doing since he was 12, and I'd decided love meant never saying no. Your father died believing I could run his company and raise you right. I succeeded at one, failed catastrophically at the other. My voice cracked. But that ends now. You're 31. You have a wife. You have a life ahead of you. Build it yourself. Daniel stood, wiped his face. For a moment he looked exactly like Henry, vulnerable, but trying to be brave. Can I still call you? Of course. I'm your mother. That doesn't change. But I'm not your bank anymore, and I'm not your safety net. After he left, I sat alone in George's old office, the one my husband's money had maintained for 20 years, and did something I hadn't done since the night Henry died. I let myself fall apart. After Daniel left my office that Monday afternoon after I'd set the boundaries I should have established 19 years ago, 6 months passed since that September wedding. 6 months since I was called a pig and discovered I had more power than anyone knew. 6 months since everything changed. It's March 2025 now. Spring is coming to Boston again, and I'm sitting in my Beacon Hill office, the same room where Henry used to work late into the night, reviewing quarterly reports from both companies. Worthington Holdings is profitable again, not spectacularly, but steadily. We restructured the Cambridge properties, brought in competent management, and established actual performance metrics. Employee morale increased 40% according to our last survey. The debt is being paid down systematically. In 3 years, we'll be solvent. George resigned as planned. Last I heard, he's learning woodworking and living in a smaller house in Newton. He sent me a letter 2 months ago, an actual apology, written in his own shaky handwriting. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will? Maybe I won't. Some debts can't be repaid with words. Linda struggled at first with the simpler lifestyle, but she found work at a Cambridge art gallery 3 days a week. Claire says her mother seems lighter somehow, freed from the performance of wealth. Derek and Trevor had to find real jobs. Derek's doing digital marketing for a startup. Trevor manages a small apartment complex in Brookline. They're learning what most people learned at 25, that work requires actual effort. Daniel still works in Worthington Holdings acquisitions department. He's actually quite good when he focuses. He pays me $2,000 on the first of every month, never late, never with excuses. We have dinner once a month at a modest restaurant in the North End. The conversations are stilted but honest. Last week, he told me he's thinking about teaching a business course at a community college. I told him that sounded worthwhile. Samantha stayed with him. That surprised me more than anything else. She took a job at a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. They moved to a modest apartment in Somerville, no views of the Charles River, no doorman. She apologized to me exactly once 3 months after the wedding. I accepted it with the same cool politeness she now extends to me. We're not close. We probably never will be. But we're civil. That's enough. Claire became one of my most trusted advisors. She works at Ashford Hospitality Group, now earned her position through competence and integrity. We have coffee most Tuesday mornings. She's the daughter I never had loyal, honest, brave enough to choose truth over comfort. I run both companies now. Ashford Hospitality continues expanding. We acquired 2 historic properties in Providence last month. I work long hours, but not the desperate 16-hour days of grief and proving myself. These are the hours of someone who knows what she's building and why. Every night I still talk to Henry's photograph on my desk. I tell him about Daniel's progress, about the company's quarterly numbers, about Claire's promotion. Sometimes I tell him I'm sorry for the mistakes I made. Sometimes I tell him I'm proud of what I fixed. I've learned something these 6 months. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation of real love. Saying no isn't cruelty. It's respect. Letting people face consequences isn't abandonment, it's trust that they're strong enough to survive their own mistakes. I didn't save everyone. George lost his company. Daniel lost his illusions. I lost 19 years believing I could protect my son from everything, including himself. But I saved what mattered, the truth, my dignity, and the possibility that Daniel might become the man his father hoped he'd be. Last night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I cooked Henry's favorite meal and sat alone in our dining room looking at his empty chair. "We're doing fine," I told the silence. Finally, we're actually doing fine. And for the first time in 6 months, maybe in 19 years, I believed it. Last night, I made Henry's favorite meal beef stew with roasted root vegetables. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in our dining room, looking at the empty chair across from me. And I realized something I should have understood 19 years ago. "We did okay," I said to him, to the silence, to the man I'd loved and lost and carried with me every single day since. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes. But Daniel's going to be okay." The wine caught the lamplight. Outside, Boston settled into its spring evening rhythm car horns, distant sirens, the low hum of a city that never quite sleeps. "I confused enabling with loving," I continued. "I thought being a good mother meant clearing every obstacle from his path, making sure he never felt pain or failure or consequence." I took a sip of wine. I was wrong. The truth is, I spent 19 years teaching my son that he could take without giving, receive without gratitude, fail without consequence. I taught him that appearances mattered more than character, that wealth meant power, that love meant never hearing the word no. I created the man who taught his wife it was acceptable to disrespect me. So, in a way, that moment at the wedding, the cruel laughter, the champagne raised in mock celebration, the word that still stings when I think of it, was partially my fault, not the cruelty itself. That belongs to them. But the conditions that made it possible, I built those with every check I wrote, every boundary I failed to enforce, every time I said yes when the right answer was no. I don't regret paying for that wedding. Not anymore. Because that wedding was the catalyst for everything that came after. The public humiliation was the beginning of personal transformation. Sometimes you need to be broken before you can be rebuilt into something stronger. It took me 61 years and $425,000 to learn this. You don't need to impress anyone to deserve respect. You deserve respect because you're a human being with inherent worth and dignity. Period. No qualifications. No conditions, no expensive weddings or strategic kindness or careful navigation of other people's egos. Just existence, just showing up as yourself. I learned that you can love people fiercely and still enforce boundaries. That saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. That letting someone face the natural consequences of their choices isn't cruelty. It's respect for their agency and capacity to grow. I learned that the people who truly love you won't require you to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. And I learned this. If someone calls you a pig literally or metaphorically, publicly or privately, you have every right to walk away, reclaim your power, and refuse to carry their cruelty as your identity, because you are not what cruel people call you in moments of fear and desperation. You are what you choose to become when you stop apologizing for taking up space. 6 months ago, I stood in a corner of the Boston Public Library holding a glass of champagne. I didn't want wearing a dress I'd spent 3 weeks choosing, watching my son marry into a family built on stolen money and desperate facades. Today I run 2 successful companies. I have dinner with my son once a month. I mentor a young woman who chose integrity over family loyalty. I talk to my husband's photograph every night and tell him the truth about my mistakes, my victories, my ongoing journey to become the person he believed I could be. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning, still struggling with the instinct to rescue Daniel when he faces difficulty, still fighting the voice that says I should have been kinder, softer, more accommodating. But I'm learning, and if you're reading this, if you've ever been dismissed, diminished, disrespected by people who should have honored you, I want you to know this. You don't have to accept cruelty from anyone. You can love people and still enforce boundaries. You can be kind and still say no. You can be generous without being a doormat. And if someone treats you as less than you are, you have permission to walk away, hold your head high, and build a life that reflects your actual worth. Sometimes we need to be shattered before we can be rebuilt into something stronger. Sometimes the worst moments become the catalyst for our best transformation. I paid $425,000 for a wedding where I was called a pig. But what I gained was priceless: my dignity, my boundaries, and the knowledge that I am enough exactly as I am. That lesson was worth every penny. Looking back at this journey, I realize family drama stories like mine don't happen overnight. They're built through years of saying yes when we should say no, of confusing enabling with love, of believing money can substitute for boundaries. Don't be like me. Don't wait 19 years to learn these lessons. First lesson: generosity without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. I thought protecting Daniel from struggle was good parenting. Instead, I taught him consequences didn't exist. God showed me that real love sometimes means watching people fall so they learn to stand. Second lesson: respect cannot be purchased. I spent $425,000 trying to buy belonging only to find my place at table 14. These grandma stories we tell ourselves about earning love through sacrifice, they're dangerous lies. Dignity comes from honoring yourself first, not from impressing others. Third lesson: silence enables abuse. When someone disrespects you publicly, they're counting on your politeness to protect them. The family drama story I lived taught me that God didn't call us to be doormats. He called us to stand with dignity. Fourth lesson: love without accountability destroys. I enabled Daniel for 19 years and created a man who would steal rather than admit failure, but boundaries with compassion. That's where transformation begins. To every grandma reading this, God doesn't waste your pain. Every grandma story of betrayal, every moment of humiliation, He's using it all to build you stronger than before. The Colemans learned that family drama stories end one of two ways: with healthy boundaries or with destruction. We chose boundaries. It wasn't easy, but with God's grace, we're finally becoming the family Henry always believed we could be. Thank you for staying until the end. Drop a 2. If you made it this far, it means everything. Quick note: this story blends creative elements with real wisdom for reflection. If it doesn't resonate, feel free to find content that speaks to your heart.